Welcome to Q&A. I'm Kendra Cooper, a Massachusetts attorney and educator, your host for today's program. My guests today are two criminal defense attorneys, Jay Milligan, to my left, who practices criminal law in Massachusetts, and Mark Stevens, who practices in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. We're going to be discussing today the laws and practices that affect drivers in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire. Particularly, there's a new law in New Hampshire that includes operating under the influence, the drugs, the over-the-counter drugs, along with prescription drugs, illegal drugs, and alcohol as possible causes of impairment. And especially for people who are traveling back and forth from Massachusetts to New Hampshire, it's important to know. We feel that there will be some interesting changes as a result of this. But Mark, could you explain a little bit about this new law and,
Sure.
and why we think it's going to be having an impact on drivers eventually?
Sure, it's going to wreak havoc on a lot of people. What they changed was in 2012 and before, it was illegal to drive under the influence of alcohol, which makes sense, or under the influence of a controlled drug, marijuana or different types of prescription drugs that were on the controlled drug list. And now they've eliminated that requirement that it be a controlled drug, and now it can be an over-the-counter drug. It can be any substance, the way the law is worded, any substance, natural or synthetic, that could impair your ability to drive. So it's really anything within the bounds of the police officer's imagination that could, you could be arrested for. Cough syrup, aspirin, anything that you could buy at, at your local drugstore.
I think I've talked to some people about this change, and they say, well, that makes sense. I mean, if you're under the influence, right?
Who did you talk to?
You're under the influence. I'm just saying.
It wasn't me. It wasn't
but I'm
Jay.
saying it's not. But this is people who aren't attorneys. But I mean, and who wants to be on the road with somebody who's under the influence? I mean,
Sure.
it's. But I mean, with this change, what do you see as kind of as the problems of some of these? Of this particular law?
Well, the problem with it is that a lot of the things that they're talking about don't actually, impair you. There's no way to tell really if somebody's impaired unless there's some kind of chemical test. And if you took a chemical test and it reveals NyQuil, what does that mean? Does that mean that you're impaired, or does it mean you took NyQuil? It doesn't necessarily mean that your ability to drive a car is impaired by it. It could be that you just can't do field sobriety tests well, or you got in an accident, or you did whatever, crossed a line, So I see like the net being thrown way too wide, and there's going to be people arrested that weren't drunk or weren't impaired by anything at all. They made the mistake of telling the cops too much, maybe.
So when someone's stopped, and this isn't a roadblock necessarily. This is how would your ordinary person who's, say, driving up 93 for a ski weekend? I mean, how would they or could they encounter this new law, especially if they may not? Why would they think they've maybe had sniffles, or they may have have been sick, maybe take some
antihistamines or something?
Antihistamine,
sure.
Yeah. What might the scenario be for them?
Well, let's say you got stopped for a plate light out, or you failed to use a turn signal and changed lanes or something on a Friday and Saturday night. They're out there looking for you to make any mistakes that they can. And you get stopped, and if they suspect you of being impaired and they ask you if you're taking any medicines, and you say, I just took just cough drops, I just took cough syrup or something like that, you didn't drink anything, they can still get you out of the car and do field sobriety tests now because you've told them you take something.
So now, even if you have an over-the-counter drug, they can really they can approach you as though they would in the past if they suspected alcohol, with an odor of alcohol. Now they don't need an odor of alcohol. Now they just stop you, and if there's some movement or something, I mean, what do they watch for when they're following you? I mean,
well, that's
sometimes
the problem.
I know.
It's all subjective.
Yeah, okay.
You get these officers, they can observe something that you and I might think is absolutely innocuous, but they think means something to them. And right then and there, as Mark said, well, all right, why don't you step out of the car? And the way the statute's written, as I understand it, and based upon conversations with Mark, that's going to be okay now.
Sure.
And so that's the issue. You've just given law enforcement that much more power, if you will, to interpret things that maybe they don't know much about it, and to get you outside the vehicle. And like Mark said, once you get into these exercises, there's no correlation between these exercises and impairment. Just maybe that someone can't stand on one leg for 30 seconds, and it may be just that, but their training dictates if you can't do it, well, guess what? You're going to be a guest at the police station for the night, and that's the problem with it.
Do you find it's more night than I see a lot of people driving up to skiing, and if you've taken say a NyQuil, you've taken something at night to be able to get through the night, you could still be under the influence that morning and not even taken something. In other words,
Sure.
I'm picturing that in the morning, driving up there.
That's not like a cop.
Yeah, I know. That's
Not like
I know. But I'm just saying that people need to be aware of what they're taking over the counter now.
Right.
Particularly in New
Well,
Hampshire.
even more so, I think what they're taking isn't really the biggest issue. It's what they tell the cops they took. Okay, so if you tell the cops, say, take this, then the suspicion turns to, well, it must be this that they've taken. You're better off just not saying you took anything at all. Because if you think about it, they've got no odor, they don't have any statements,
Right.
it's just a broad-based guess that you're impaired by something. And they don't have the something that they need to connect the dots to get you.
So even if they confess or if they admit that they've taken some sort of over-the-counter medicine, that is absolutely enough to get them at
Yes.
least out of the
Oh,
car.
sure,
Okay.
sure.
And then whatever follows. You were going to say something, Jay?
Well, I was just going to say that the issue with it is that officers ask you questions for a reason.
Okay.
They're looking to elicit information from you, and a lot of people want to be honest and want to tell the truth. And with this right now, you could be honest and not be under the influence of alcohol or drugs or any cough medicine. And the problem with you being honest with somebody is you're going to wind up most likely getting arrested.
And having to defend yourself for something that really, in the past, wouldn't have even gotten you out of the car, and you
Exactly.
probably, it could be any number of things.
Right.
I had a question, just because this is reminding me of, this is a reason that someone can stop you. They can say there's a light out or there's something that they noticed irregular. I've had people say to me that certain cars are more likely to be stopped, like a black SUV with tinted windows. Have you ever run into?
Well, I have a black
that?
SUV. With
I know.
They target those. We're
Well, I'm
profiled.
just wondering, is there really a profile out on that?
I suppose. I suppose with the tinted window thing, anytime an officer can't see inside a vehicle,
Then
they might be more drawn to that
for
vehicle as
some
opposed to someone like me who doesn't have tints in the windows and you can see everything that's going on in the car. I suppose there is some aspect of profiling there, but
I don't know so much if that's the case, at least up our way in New Hampshire. I don't think that they're profiling vehicles. I think they're more just profiling everybody, and they're looking for reasons to stop any car that's out there, however slight the transgression or plate light or something like that is. They're just looking for reasons to stop them, see if they can smell alcohol in the car.
Now, if they were to stop a person and have them start to do the one-legged stand or the walk and turn or whatever, this New Hampshire, they honor the eye test, but Massachusetts does not. Is that
correct.
Is that true? Now, with this
It's
eye test,
admissible. The
okay.
magic pen test where they wave it in front of them and make their eyes wiggle, and that.
And
supposedly
what
means
is
they're
that
drunk.
supposed? Yeah, I was reading about why they believe that indicates that a person's under the influence of some drug or somehow impaired. But I guess I don't really understand that, as a person.
Because they're taught at the police academy, it does.
Well, yeah. Well, it has something to do with the belief that in moving the pen. Could you demonstrate what it is that or could you just kind of show me
Sure,
what
what
that
they'll do
means?
is,
Because I had never encountered that before.
And that's good.
Yeah, I know, it is good.
But they,
That's
what-
true.
what
We
they
don't
do
want
is
to be.
They'll hold a pen or a finger 12 to 15 inches away from your face, slightly above your eye level, and they'll move the pen laterally and watch the movement of your eyes to see if your pupils are jerking. And if the pupils are jerking, the theory goes that you're under the influence of something.
So but they really wouldn't know what it might be that could cause, and it could be a particular eye problem.
Sure.
There are quite a few other possible sources of that kind
Or
of.
it's not even there.
Right.
Right.
Well, and I'm thinking,
Which is generally why it's not admitted here in Massachusetts.
Okay.
So while they routinely give it on the roadside and as a tool, as a test, if you will, in assessing whether someone's going to be arrested, when it gets to court, it is generally held to be not admissible because they're not qualified to interpret the data, as Mark was saying.
Now, but do Massachusetts police actually do that test out in the field anyway?
They routinely do it as part of the standardized, so-called standardized field sobriety test, which would be the horizontal gaze, nystagmus, as Mark calls it, the magic pen test,
that's right.
walk and turn, and the one-leg stand are the 3 standardized field tests that they're all trained in the academy and routinely will give, whether it's in Massachusetts or New Hampshire for that matter. Those are the kind of the big 3.
Yeah. Now, does that vary from class to class, or has that been pretty standard for several years, that this is the way they do it?
The standardized tests have been used for years.
Since
Okay.
95.
95.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
so-
what I was wondering, if it's the same.
Of course, there are always, individual variations to these tests, and, very few of them. Well, there are a few that follow it to a T, and some people interpret things differently and use their own little twist turns to it, and, which they shouldn't be doing, but they do, and, they say they're trying to make things easier when probably they're not.
Yeah, I think there are some instances in which they ask the people to, like when they first stop you, for example, and they'll try to see how how many things you can do simultaneously or something,
Right.
and I don't know how many people don't really know where their registration is, but it fumbles, and you could really have a difficult time.
Sure.
Just the fact that someone stopped you.
They call that a divided attention test.
Oh, is that what they call it? Okay.
Yeah.
So
So they ask for 2 things at once and see if you can comply, but if your glove box is a mess,
Yeah.
and you're sifting through things, then that's
right.
fumbling. You can't find your registration.
Oh, yeah, no, it would take a little bit for me. I should go through that.
What you want to do, though, is you want to make sure you know where that is all the time.
Right,
You want to
yeah,
make sure be able to produce those things, practice it, be able to produce them quickly.
and have that kind of information right there, easy access.
That's one of the things they use as a legal basis to get you out of the car, too, so.
Right, when they
Yeah.
look at that, so that just contributes to the suspicion that maybe you might be undoing.
Right.
Okay, what, as far as I know, the impairment from drugs and alcohol, is there any way that they can tell what kind of drug when they stop you? I mean, whether it's prescription or whether it's, over the counter? I mean, what are some signs, or what do they look for if they think, well, the smell of marijuana, I can understand, but.
Right.
They look at the pupil size, they look at the speech, but the main thing that gets most people is they tell them what they took, and if a person is silent and they don't tell the cops what they took, whether it's legal or illegal, they've got a lot better chance of getting out of it, of beating it. But they do have a protocol. Jay and I just did a couple of CLE classes that involved the what they call a drug recognition expert, DRE protocol, that they do, and it's a 12-step process that they do to try and categorize the drug. And Jay's familiar with that, and he
And so
just taught a great class on
this
it.
will be after you're arrested, And once you start telling somebody what you're on and you go through these exercises and they arrest you, well, then what they'll do is oftentimes call in what's called a DRE, a drug recognition expert, and they'll go through in a controlled environment, or as much of a controlled environment as they have at the station, this 12-step process. And what they're trying to do is isolate whether or not it's medical or drugs.
But they'll arrest you first, before they
You're already
decide
under
whether
arrest.
it's, oh, I
You're already
thought
under
maybe
arrest,
they
and,
would do-
and the arrest isn't going to be undone at that point. They're just looking for further evidence
You
against
don't
you.
get unarrested.
Yeah, right. And so more importantly, what they're looking to do is then put it into a class of drugs. Because that's one of the requirements of the statute, is not only to say you're under the influence of drugs, but to identify it, and then to say that you're under the influence of it. And so,
I think one of the areas that I'm concerned about is some of the older residents, older drivers, and I mean 60 is older as far as Massachusetts law is concerned, and but it's the impact of the drugs on people, and not realizing that whether it's alcohol or drugs, that their body processes things differently, and it takes longer to get these same drugs or some sort of alcohol out of their system. And sometimes, I mean, do you see that you're seeing older people with these drug charges, or these driving under the influence charges?
No.
It's pretty much, so it hasn't happened, because the baby boomers are getting older, and that's what I was
Right.
wondering, if you see an increase as far as the clients. that you
No, but I
see.
think the older driver is more likely to be willing to talk to the cops and tell them what they took, which is a problem. The younger drivers are growing up in the internet age a little bit more savvy about being silent, exercising their rights, not telling the cops what they've been up to, or just not telling the cops anything.
And I think more to the point, some of the older individuals that have been taking these drugs for some time, it's part of their routine daily life. They don't think anything of it. It's what they do every day. And now all of a sudden what they do every day is now against the law in New Hampshire.
And they're doing what the doctor told them to do. They're doing exactly what the doctor told them to do. They can function perfectly on these medications. They're used to it. Their body's got a tolerance to it. But if they make the mistake of saying what they took, they're going to find themselves in a problem.
I think sometimes too, when they first come out of a hospital, they don't realize that there can be residual effects from the drugs that they were taking that they're no longer, that they're not even taking, but it takes days sometimes to get those things out of the system. And so they're not really knowingly, violating any law because they don't realize that they're under the influence. Now, you were saying something about you don't have to have a capacity of knowing. Actually, maybe it's Massachusetts that there's a standard.
Yeah. So whenever you take a prescription medication, you have to know or should have known that this was going to impact you or make you under the influence of the drug and affect you to the point where you're impaired. Well, oftentimes, as you said, whether you're leaving the hospital or leaving your doctor's office, they just give you the prescription. They call the pharmacy now. You don't even really have to do anything. You go pick it up. It comes in a pill, and you take it. The writing on the bottles, nobody can really read anyways. And the information that you leave with is just, a stack of papers with these warnings on it. But, no one really reasons that. We trust our doctors that if they're going to prescribe us something, it's something that's going to help us, not get us arrested. And so they don't really know what the effects are. And all of a sudden, before you know it, you swerve over the line or you're going a little over the speed limit and away you go.
So people really need to ask more questions when they're prescribed drugs, and even from the primary cares, which I've found that it's almost better to talk to the pharmacist. One of the points you said, you said, well, you should talk. You call up and you contact the pharmacist, and a problem is that we have multiple pharmacies now. Years ago, you had a single pharmacist that pretty much kind of kept track and say, wait a minute, are you sure that this is correct? Now you can purchase drugs on the internet. And so there's not necessarily one party that really knows everything. And so they don't know the drug interactions and the cumulative effects.
We're such a technological society, the face-to-face contact is almost non-existent. Everything's done through a drive-through window, or do you have any questions for the pharmacist? And all I really want to do is just sign the tab, give it back to them, get your prescription, and go off to your next chore. So there's not a lot of interaction or explanation, and we're such a society where we're hung up on videos, but they don't have anything like that for you to watch or even digest.
So we can conclude then that with as far as this new law, and now is there any other state that you're aware of that has this law that New Hampshire just passed?
Hopefully
about
not
over-the-counter?
Not Massachusetts for sure, and I don't think anyone's gone to kind of the crazy extent of this type of language that could incorporate anything from that plant to anything you could think of, could technically impair you in the police officer's mind. But it was designed for the synthetic marijuana. This is how this thing started. The synthetic marijuana started to come out at K2 and then K3, and salvia and some of the other things that were becoming popular to smoke. And by changing the chemical composition of these substances that were being smoked, they could keep evading being added to the list. So it started out as a way to combat that by law enforcement. And then they just decided the legislature just decided to throw everything else under the sun in with it, and that's where the problem became.
Yes. There's been a problem in Massachusetts with once a drug, and this would be not so much something that someone's taken, but when they find medications in the car, when they're stopped, there's been a problem with determining what are those medications. Now, it's one thing if you have it's a prescription drug and you can see the packaging, but what if it's powder? And what's the process once a policeman would make a stop and find the drugs, they arrest you, but what happens to those drugs? And I know we have a chain of custody that's supposed to be happening, and just recently...
The end of the chain isn't good down here.
Yeah, well, there's been a problem in the past year, I think, and it's just coming out because, you want to make sure that what the person got or what the person was on is indeed the drug that's been analyzed. Would you like to explain
Yeah, well,
a little about what's been happening?
the
Because
process-
I don't even know where to start.
You know, the process would be, you know, they seize it, establish a chain of custody that would then be brought to a lab, a state lab, and they were tested. And then they would come back with a certificate saying that, you know, this is cocaine, or this is marijuana, or, you know, this is Percocet, you know, whatever the drug was. And then if you wanted to question the technician on what that drug was, you call him. Well, you know, in Massachusetts, we recently had an issue with, you know, Annie Dukin, who was one of the chemist labs, or the senior chemist there, testing a majority of these drugs, wherein, you know, there are allegations where she was either substituting drugs or adding drugs that were not present, or adding weight to certain drugs, making the enhanced penalties then become effective. And so, since these allegations have come out, it's been revealed that this was a large-scale operation that she was running, where she was literally either tampering with samples or adding samples to the point where...
These are allegations.
Allegations,
this
of course.
Is definitely allegations.
I know that she's been charged, and she's going through the process, but you get a lot of people who have been in custody in jails who are literally being released now as a result of these, and you know, there'll be lawsuits. There'll be, some of these people have been sitting in jail, maybe wrongfully so, based upon one chemist not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yes, you can just imagine people, and I think there sometimes is a tendency for people to believe that if someone's been arrested, and you know, we do have due process, and this was an integral part of making sure that the people that have been charged and found guilty are, you know, truly guilty of using, you know, prohibited substances.
Right.
And it's really, it's not just shocking. I don't know of any other state that's run into this. I mean, have you heard of any other? I mean, have they? I don't know.
Oh, sure. It's pretty widespread. There's been lab scandals with breath testing and chemical testing throughout the country.
On this kind of scale?
Yeah, I know in Washington, D.C., I think it was a year and a half ago, they determined that all the breath tests between an 07 and 09 were false readings, basically, because the way they adjusted the machine to catch 07s and 08s, they basically cheated to get those people to get convictions on them. There were hundreds of convictions overturned.
Oh, well, actually, I think I've heard there's something in Andover, I think. Or there was something about the calibration of the breath test, the breathalyzer, and actually not having been calibrated for some time or something.
Sure.
Which would give false readings.
But this was every DWI case in the District of Columbia for a long period of time. And there's another lab scandal in Indiana. There's been a number of them. Wow.
Yeah, I think there's another, now, something I didn't know until this hit the newspapers was that these labs, some are run by the state police and some are run by the Department of Public Health. And the one in Jamaica Plain, it was run by the Department of Public Health, who also oversee issues that have to do with, you know, elder abuse. And I mean, I'm just, you know, in nursing homes. I mean, just saying, I look at their plate and I think about all these different aspects of government that they have as responsibility. And I have to wonder if maybe it's time to narrow things down a little bit or consolidate some things or what. But, and there was something just recently in the news, I think, that involved a chemist out in Western Mass. And so you really do wonder how widespread all of this is. I did have a question that someone had asked me regarding, okay, what if you realize as you're driving that you are, you know, that you're still having residual effects from, say a sleeping pill or whatever, and you're driving to work in the morning and you just don't feel right, you pull over. Now, what should you do? I mean, aren't there cases where people have felt that something's wrong? They pull over, they fall asleep, they pass out or whatever, and then they're charged, even though they're in the car, but they're say in a parking lot, and they're under the influence, they're charged with that, and again, actually convicted sometimes.
I mean, if they do that, they're sitting duck.
If you, okay.
So there's no, what it's called is like a safe harbor exception, meaning, you know, if you feel the effects of an alcohol or drug while you're en route to a location, you can pull over. There are some states that you can pull over and then be exempt from perhaps prosecution, or at least use it as a defense. That's been rejected by Massachusetts courts. I don't think New Hampshire has anything like that. So,
no, it's really,
you know, it's almost an incentive to say, all right, well, if you feel that way, you're just better off just keep going. and try to get to your
Yeah, well,
destination
that's
in a
what
safe
I-
way.
I-
Or
From a criminal liability standpoint, it is. It's obviously the wrong thing to do. You know, you might smash into something, but the case law in New Hampshire, too, is if they're behind the wheel, the keys are in the ignition, they're sleeping, they're a sitting duck for a DWI. Because they're easier for the police to find, the cars they're running,
That instead, I wondered because it seemed to me that it made sense if the person is, it realizes that there's something wrong and it's better to be off the road, away from trees and other cars and people. So I was, something that's just started, but I think we'll have to stay for another day is that distracted driving that's really become a topic. But I think at this point, the drugs that are out there, it's a serious problem. There are a lot of people who are under the influence, but particularly this inclusion of drugs that are over the counter and easily used, and people would not realize they have to be very careful when they drive. And even if a day or so later or more is something that we really hope that people understand.
and that they don't tell the police what they've taken.
Yes. Well, thank you, both of you,
Thank you,
for
Kendra.
joining us today. This is
Thank
a
you.
huge topic, and we could talk about this for quite a while. But I expect that we'll be seeing more in the news on this because
I'm sure.
it just
Right.
went into effect.
Just went into effect
January
this month,
1st,
yeah.
1st, 2013. I'm Kendra Cooper, and I thank you for watching.